And now a continuation of Hot Lead Payoff by L. Ron Hubbard. On to Chapter 4, Graham Treachery. It was almost morning before Tom Nolan neared the Graham hacienda. Before him spread the many buildings by which Martin Graham strove to add prestige to his name and weight to his word. The casa here was not daub, but frame, and even by the dusk of the moonlight the effect of a New England mansion against the setting of Spanish stables and shed was as odd and ugly as Martin Graham himself. It did not surprise Tom as he drew up to a quieter walk to see that there was a light burning on the second floor. It did not surprise him because at irregular intervals he had crossed a trail so fresh that the wind had not yet had time to dull the impressions of flying hoofs. And he knew that he had drawn close upon one of the killers of Bob O'Link, because no other mount had the stamina that Ginger, his thoroughbred, could show. When he reached near side of the corrals, he dismounted and tethered Ginger to the breeze. All the flaming rage had gone down, leaving him a chill instrument of destruction. He knew what would happen if he killed Alan Graham. He would not kill him. He had the note on the envelope. He would take Alan Graham from his house and force him to go to Rio Camarca. The reputation of the Nolans was not too dim. The reputation of the Nolans could force Sheriff Hamilton to make the arrest and protect a jury from intimidation. On stealthy feet, Tom came to the foundation of the White House. He examined the buildings nearby and then crept up and around a veranda, gazing at the pillars and gauging the difficulty of the climb, which must be silent. He almost bumped into a horse which stood tied to the railing. Lathered white and still breathing noisily, the animal was too weary to start or make a sound. Coldly, Tom Nolan examined the saddle and gear. The style was northern, plain and unimaginative, and the leather showed much wear. But for all that, the saddle was an expensive one. The Winchester was in the boot, and Tom drew it forth. He levered a cartridge and thoughtfully put the rifle back. This stranger had carried the weapon on an empty, so upset had he been in his flight from the scene. A patch of yellow light streamed down from the room above the porch. Hiding all but his hands in shadow, Tom drew out the empty he had picked up near the place where he had found Bob and compared its cap with the one just taken. And as no firing pin strikes the same, as the shells were of equal size and the marks upon them identical, Tom knew that he had found his man. If the killer was not Alan Graham, then he was up there with him. Tom went silently up the steps to the porch and then stood upon the rail. He hooked his fingers under the eave, and with a powerful swing he sent his long, hard body up and out to get a higher hold with his knees. He eased himself over the edge of the sloping porch roof. The window was accessible from there. Cautiously he began to inch toward it. He could hear a low mutter of voices now. 2 voices. He made his way noiselessly and therefore slowly, as the handholds were few and his boots slippery. Suddenly, one voice jarred angrily, and an instant later, a shot thundered within the room. Tom hardly had time to brace himself. The light went out with a crash. Footsteps were loud to the window, and where they stopped to be replaced by the creak of leather. The stranger crashed into Tom, and Tom shot out his arms to hold him. The man was driven into fury by the unexpected shock. He kicked and clawed and tried to pull himself away. Tom felt himself slipping. He let go suddenly and grabbed for his Colt. The man struck with savage fists when he saw the weapon glint. Tom's thumb slipped accidentally from the trigger, and the weapon roared, stabbing a ribbon of flame into the stranger's left shoulder. Shock catapulted the fellow backwards. He vanished from view over the edge, and Tom slid ahead, striving to get down and still be in shape to fight. He landed like a cat, and by the time Tom came to the edge, the fellow was mounted and stabbing spur. There was no way to follow. The man might be willing to kill his own horse, but Tom would not kill Ginger. Besides, he had come for Alan Graham, and he meant to get him. He scrambled back up the sloping roof and came at last to the window. He lowered himself over the sill. The room was pitch black and without sound. Tom stepped back so as to take his silhouette out of the window and searched his pockets for matches. He found one and lit it. Light flowed out through the room, showing up a candle on the floor. Tom picked it up and touched the flame to the wick, and he saw Alan Graham. The man was sprawled on his face before an open safe. One hand was clutching a solitary gold piece. There was no back to his head anymore. Bewildered, Tom knew that he had to trail the other man, but there were ways of doing that. If he roused the house and turned out the men, the murderer could be caught within the hour, and even old man Graham would rage to be off after the killer of his own son. Tom stepped toward the door, gun still cocked, left hand reaching for the knob. But before he could touch it, the door swung in upon him. Before him stood Mary Graham. The dark robe she had thrown about her made her face even more startlingly white. She looked in astonishment at Tom, and then her glance went past him to Alan on the far side of the room. She stood frozen for an instant, and then with a cry she rushed past Tom to Alan's side. Tom knew he should have stopped her. He knew it too late. Urgently, Mary plucked at her brother, trying to pull him over onto his back. And then she saw with horror distended eyes that Alan was dead. In a moment she remembered Tom. He stood facing her. "You murderer!" she cried. "Wait," said Tom. "Another man was here. I tried to stop him. Get Martin out and we can catch him." She was not hearing anything he said. Her face was bitter to look upon now. And Tom was not warned by the fact that she did not speak until a gun muzzle jabbed viciously into his spine. "Drop your gun," said Martin Graham. "Wait," said Tom, turning slowly. "You've got this all wrong. The man that killed Alan is running away. If we start right now, we can have him within an hour. I've got something to settle with him myself." Martin Graham's eyes were like chunks of coal. His head looked like a weathered skull, and his teeth were clenched in fury. His hand trembled as he strove to hold the trigger back. Martin Graham would not be killing his first man if he killed Tom Nolan. "There's no need of talk," said Graham, "and your wits won't get you out when you've got a smoking gun in your hand." Tom glanced down at the weapon and saw that a thin white wisp still drooled from the muzzle. He looked up again and read his death in Martin's eyes. Mary was still at Alan's side, watching the two men in the doorway. She was stunned by the swift strike of death. She could see Tom's back, how straight it was, how defiant. She could also see the smoke coiling from his gun. "You're just using this as an excuse, Graham," said Tom. "You don't think I killed your son because you can see with half an eye that I could not have shot him from the window, and certainly he would not have turned his back to me, a Nolan." Graham's dead white skin was stretched tight, and his teeth gleamed. "There's no use begging, no use whining to me for mercy." Tom straightened even more, and for the first time in years, anger began to blaze within him. "Begging? Whining. Martin Graham, whatever I've done, whatever I am, I'm a Nolan. There was money in that safe and it's gone now. I haven't got it and it's not in this room. You see a chance for legal murder, a chance to wipe the last Nolan from your path. You're a yellow-bellied sneaking hound, Martin Graham. You aren't fit to dirty Arizona sand with your shadow. I'm telling you straight, you'd better shoot or by God, you're a dead man yourself. Mary watched her father's face for an instant as she came to her feet. She whipped her glance to Tom's strong back, and the whip crack of his words still vibrated within her. Leave the room, Graham ordered her, never taking his eyes from Tom Nolan's heart. She walked steadily forward. She had to pass Tom to get to the door. Neither man was looking at her. The only light was coming from the candle, which flickered on the table behind Tom. Something was happening within her. Suddenly, she saw all things with a clarity she had never before achieved. This Martin Graham, her father, was not the lord of empire and the arbiter of range destiny. He was Martin Graham, the carpetbagger, the miserly, small-souled money-monger who had killed those he could not buy. For years she had wondered uneasily, borne down by the weight of her father's hand, held in check at every turn, blinded by lies. She knew that Martin Graham would shoot Tom Nolan without giving him a chance. She could see his soul bared by his eagerness for Tom Nolan's blood, and she saw Martin Graham unaffected by the death of his own son. She came abreast of Tom. Neither man watched her, neither suspected what she was about to do. Suddenly, she sidestepped toward Tom. She slashed out with her hand and sent the candle clattering to the floor, blanketing the room with darkness. But before the last flicker was gone, Martin Graham saw his own daughter step in front of Tom Nolan. Graham had started to release his hammer. He whipped up the gun, and the shot went into the ceiling. "You little fool!" shouted Martin. "Get out of the way!" "You can't kill him!" cried Mary. She pushed at Tom. "Quick! Get out before the vaqueros come!" Tom stood where he was. The clatter of his Colt dropping to the floor was loud in the room. "Step back," said Tom quietly, not moving. "You might have been shot." Light splashed in the hall outside, and a mozzo rushed into the room, lantern in hand. Martin Graham was standing with his back to the wall, still gripping his Colt, watching Tom put Mary to one side. In that instant, the girl could not understand the fierce independence which had made Tom Nolan refuse to take advantage of that chance. She backed, staring at him. Other vaqueros were coming into the room, variously armed. Tom Nolan stood where he was, watching coldly. There were loud boot beats on the stairs, and a moment later a thick and soft man entered. It was Tate Hamilton, the sheriff, several members of a posse at his heels. Tate Hamilton looked professionally at Alan's body, and then at Tom, and finally at Graham. But Martin Graham was evidently as surprised to see the sheriff as Hamilton was to find Nolan and a corpse. Hamilton faced Graham. "We didn't get here in time to stop it, Mr. Graham." "But..." "Yes," said Martin Graham. "Take Tom Nolan into custody." He knew he was winning, and now he gave Nolan a contemptuous glance. "Arrest him and hold him for the murder of my son." Chapter 5. The Frame-Up. Bulging over the arms of his swivel chair, Sheriff Tate Hamilton seriously regarded a fly which was buzzing inquiringly about the toe of one boot. His head gave the appearance of having been blown up monstrously and then punctured, as great folds of skin sagged emptily to obscure any semblance of bone structure. He was sheriff in Rio Camarca because he was a sensible man, never interfering with anyone of importance unless he saw that it was diplomatic to follow the lead of one of even greater importance. He heard a horse come to a stop outside his office and took his heels down from his desk to stare disinterestedly at the door. Instantly, he was all attention, all business, throwing warrants and reward bulletins about in a frenzy of activity. Martin Graham stood on the threshold, casting about as much shadow as a knife blade. He was always somber enough to look upon, but now he was clothed wholly in black. Hamilton seized a chair and hauled it out from the wall, yanking a bandana from his pocket to dust the seat. "Well, well, well," said the sheriff. "This is a great surprise, Mr. Graham." Graham looked his contempt for such groveling. He sat down, spreading his coattails. Hamilton bustled around the other side of the desk and perched himself in his own chair, leaning forward eagerly, the perfect picture of attention. Graham's voice was a raven's croak. "What have you picked up by way of evidence, Hamilton?" "All the evidence in the world," said Hamilton. "We'll hang him for certain." Graham nodded stiffly. "May I see this evidence?" "Well, certainly," replied Hamilton. He dived into his top drawer and brought out some papers, getting up to lay them out for Graham. "These are signed testimonies," said Hamilton. "Your servants and some of the boys around town that were anxious to oblige. And this paper here," he added with some uneasiness, "I found this on Tom Nolan. I got these 2 cartridges off in him too, but I don't know what good they are." Martin Graham scratched his jaw, studying the envelope. "Nolan is alone and heading for his ranch with a bankroll. Get him halfway." He turned it over and gave a slight start when he saw the address. Hamilton appeared to be nervous. "I thought I'd better show that to you, Mr. Graham. I was wondering—" "Yes, very nice of you to do so. However, it is preposterous. This is not Alan's handwriting. Obviously, this envelope was discarded and picked out of the wastebasket at the post office in town by some other person." "Certainly. That's the way it was," said Hamilton eagerly. "Yes," said Graham. "That's the way it was. Yes, Hamilton, I see no reason for keeping this in the files, as it has nothing to do with the murder of my son. Do you?" No, indeed, Mr. Graham." Martin Graham picked a pack of matches from the desk and, holding one corner of the paper, touched light to the bottom. Hamilton watched with fascination, partly because the bony hands of the man did not seem to be sensitive to the pain of fire. Graham dropped the paper on the floor and it smoldered into a curl of black ash. He ground it to powder. The bullets were glittering on top of the other papers. Graham picked them up and clinked them together in his palm. As he rolled them back and forth, he scowled. Finally, he saw that the marks on the cap of each were identical. He almost smiled. "And these," said Graham, "are of no importance either, are they, Hamilton?" "None at all," agreed the sheriff. Graham slid them into his pocket and fell to scratching his jaw anew. He eyed the other statements for several seconds before he picked one up. "This man," said Graham, "says that this Fenner that was found dead between here and Nolan's ranch was seen in company with my son." "Yes," said Hamilton. But at sight of the quick scowl, he added, Yes, that is an error, isn't it, Mr. Graham?" "Decidedly. Fenner just happened to be in the bank, and he already had a grudge against Bob Nolan, and paid it off by robbery." "Of course," said Hamilton. I'll get that changed." Graham turned to go, but he stopped in the doorway and faced Hamilton again. "There is something I would like to show. I would like to know, Sheriff." "Anything, Mr. Graham. Just pop the question, and if I know the answer. Why is it that you appeared at my ranch so quickly night before last?" Hamilton spoke with assurance. "Oh, that's easy. I got a note from Alan saying that he would have an interesting caller just before morning." "You have that note, Hamilton?" "Oh, well, sure." The sheriff went to his desk and brought it to Martin Graham, who took it and studied it for some time. "You haven't any idea who Alan might have meant, Hamilton?" "Not at all. But that proves that Alan was home because he gave it to the vaquero that brought it about the time Bob Nolan was shot." Yes, I see. "Very well, you can keep this note, Hamilton." "Yes, sir," replied the sheriff, taking it back. Graham walked stiffly to the door and stood there looking at the church and the rest of Rio Camarca. Then he walked down the steps, his body servant, made ready to hold up the stirrup with a quickness remarkable for his size. The man Pedro was as thick through the barrel as a mustang, and his eyes had the look of sandpapered glass. Graham paid him no heed, walking leisurely toward the bank. Pedro took the reins of the mounts and followed after in the street, worshipfully watching his master. Evidently by telepathy, Blanchard scented Graham coming and popped open his office door at the rear of the building. The butterball banker nodded respectfully, and solemnly ushered Graham to a chair. Graham sat down like a stick breaking in half. He planted his cane on the floor and put his chin on the top of it, inspecting Blanchard gravely. Blanchard stopped in the middle of the floor. He was very nervous and kept kneading his hands. When he found out what he was doing he stopped and stuck them under the tail of his frock coat. Well, Martin," said Blanchard with false heartiness. "You're having a busy day about town. Nice day, isn't it? Glad to see you." "The day is all right," said Graham. "But don't lie to me, Blanchard. You're not glad to see me." "Why, whatever put such an idea into your head? After all, you're the biggest man in the Rio Camarca country." "Yes, that's true," said Graham, almost grinning. "That's very true. Now, of course, it is most unfortunate that the Nolans met with such disaster, but—" "Sit down and stop shaking," interrupted Graham. "You think that I am going to force you to do something for me, and you are afraid now to incur my anger. You are right. I am going to let you do something for me." "Anything within reason," said Blanchard. "Could you mean simply anything?" "Why, yes, of course, Martin. As a friend." "There's no friendship involved here," stated Graham. "I know what you think of me. I know what all Rio Camarca thinks of me. Yes, I'm known here. I'm known and I'm hated, but it will do Rio Camarca no good to squirm." "Why, certainly nobody in—" "They do, and I know it," stated Graham. "Oh, I can give you what they think. I come down from the States and benefit from the war in Texas. I amass a fortune and buy my way to empire. But I am a carpetbagger. I am a money grubber." Blanchard crouched in his chair. Graham was actually relishing this interview. "Yes," said Graham, "I am a carpetbagger. I am without family. I am nothing." He laughed, and it grated on Blanchard's nerves. Graham got up with a jerk and pointed out the door. "But there is Rio Camarca. Your royalty here was the House of Nolan. That is done. In 30 days, Tom Nolan will swing for murder. Bob Nolan is dead and buried. Destiny has swung, Blanchard. I am a carpetbagger. I am nothing, but my word is law in a land which could not be crossed with a month's riding." He sat down and planted his chin on the end of his cane, and his eyes glittered. "You hold paper on the crazy N. I want the crazy N, and I mean to have it. And I'll get it before Tom Nolan walks up the 13 steps to dance on air." "If there's anything I can do," began Blanchard, sweating. "Yes, I think there is. Tom Nolan needs money. As an old friend, you will loan him that money personally on a demand note. He has to have lawyers, and he will find the pay is going to be high. You will sell me that note, and you will do the rest." "But," said Blanchard, surging to his feet, "that is outright theft." Graham also rose. "A banker talking about theft." It amused him as he marched towards the door. There he looked back with contempt. "You will have that note here for me at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Blanchard." The banker met the glittering eyes, but only for a moment. He sat down abruptly, and his voice was a whisper. "All right, Graham." The next chapter, Chapter 6, The Trial. The judge was new to Rio Camarca, and all through the trial he had been so solemn that he had greatly impressed the courtroom. It was said that he had come from Texas and that his appointment was new, straight from the capital. He had white hair and a white beard, which he pulled thoughtfully just before he stated, "Objection overruled," in an answer of a plea to Tom's attorney. The trial had been in session for hours, and the courtroom was hot. The jury drooped disconsolately, bullied beyond all resistance by the bulldog-faced district attorney, who was also newly appointed and who had also been in Texas. Tom's lawyer was a meek little man in gray, but he was the only one available, and Tom, too late, knew that the $5,000 fee was money badly spent. In a timid, piping voice, Lawyer Lambert would say, "Judge Racker, if you don't mind, I object to the district attorney's implication that," and then Judge Racker would pull his beard and sink his chin on his chest and look over the top of his spectacles in a manner of old ladies looking at little boys and say, "Objection overruled." Always, after that, District Attorney Corrigan would snort and look contemptuous, and his expression could be seen fleetingly on the faces of the jury. Tom sat like a chunk of granite and listened to lies. He had been without any feeling whatever during the whole trial. It was as though he sat on the moon watching himself led to the gallows, for he was just that helpless in stopping the process. At first, the jury had interested him. Strangely enough, he could not recall seeing any one of the members around Rio Camarca before, and the various attire indicated the California fields, the railway construction camps, plains, and mountains. Except when District Attorney Corrigan snarled and snapped at them and doubled up his fists and appeared to be restraining himself from murder with difficulty, the jury had no interest in anything. Quite patently, each man knew what he was supposed to do, and Lawyer Lambert had offered no objections to their impaneling. The crowd in the court was a different matter. From time to time there was a muttering growl in the room, and gun belts creaked as outraged punchers moved restively. The jury, very early in the trial, had noticed this, but paid little attention to it. The judge had not been very emphatic with his gavel, and at times he appeared the least bit worried. Not so Martin Graham. The new lord of Rio Camarca sat stiffly in his chair, and every time the mutter went up, he turned and surveyed the room behind him with an almost amused contempt. Turning back, he would meet the eyes of Judge Racker, and the judge would instantly become very businesslike. Tom knew that he had one chance and only one. If the town got angry enough, he would be released by force. But that required the arising of a leader to form the nucleus of a mob, and that leader might or might not appear. District Attorney Corrigan was talking now, shaking his jowls and scowling and banging his fist on the end of the jury box. "And so this sneaking murderer, with his treachery in his heart, leapt into the room. You know that the innocent boy he killed had no chance. He was given no chance, did not even possess a gun. He did not even know that his murderer was behind him until this Tom Nolan pushed his gun muzzle against the back of his head and pulled the trigger. Gentlemen of the jury, you are intelligent men. You have seen the evidence. You know that there was a motive. You know that 2 shots had been fired from the guilty man's weapon. You know the character of the Nolans and the wild escapades with which their history has been strewn. Gentlemen of the jury, when you consider your verdict, remember that if you acquit this man, you are turning loose upon Rio Camarca a savage killer without feeling. You know his guilt. You know that Tom Nolan must hang." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the state rests its case with the jury." Judge Racker pulled his beard. Tom looked at Lawyer Lambert, and the wisp of a man dropped his glance confusedly. "And the defense?" prompted Judge Racker. Lambert got up and sidled to the end of the box and stopped there as though poised for a quick getaway. "Gentlemen of the jury, my client comes, it is true, from a family with a wild history, but... Lambert glanced at Graham, who nodded. "But these men were instrumental," continued Lambert, "in molding Arizona, in wresting it from its wild state. And the habit of killing, the family cannot realize that the day of killing is done. You must make allowances for my client. He was angry because his brother had been killed, and he made the mistake of thinking the killer was Alan Graham. In spite of the long ride, which makes the district attorney say that the murder was premeditated, it is possible that my client's rage was still strong and that he didn't know what he was doing. He probably would not be dangerous if he was turned loose, gentlemen. Your Honor, the defense rests." Lambert shuffled to his seat, taking care not to meet Tom's eyes. Judge Racker pulled his white beard and rapped his gavel to wake up a sheep herder who had dozed in the jury box. "Gentlemen of the jury, I advise that you ponder this case," said Racker. "I advise that you think it over until tomorrow morning anyhow, so that you will be certain of your decision." The foreman, a heavy man in a red shirt, finally got up, and Tate Hamilton led the 12 good men in true from the room. Three deputies came for Tom and handcuffed him. Tom got up. He stood for a moment, looking with contempt at Lambert, and then he marched away. Behind him, the courtroom was growling in subdued anger. He glanced back once with fleeting hope, and then stoically walked into the sunlight and across the street and through the dimness of the jail corridor. A deputy took the cuffs from him and thrust him into the cell. The door clanged and the key grated in the lock. Then the deputies were gone. At first, Tom did not realize that the jail had new occupants. The single, well-barred room was the only cell, and bunks ranged up the walls on both sides. In the lower bunk to the right sat a man the shade of a horned toad. He was very gaunt and gave the appearance of being wholly dehydrated, like a piece of tough, jerked meat. He had a gray mustache, much the worse for chewing, and eyes surrounded by squint wrinkles, and his jeans were worn shiny on the right thigh. He could be nothing but a Texan. Tom, still standing in the center of the room, caught a movement to his left. There sat a man who looked as though a sledgehammer had hit him on the head, telescoping him. He had a swarthy complexion and startling white and sharp teeth. He bubbled with good humor. The mustached gentleman swung down his feet and looked carefully at Tom. "You gotta be, but I can't see it." "Oh, he sure is," burbled the other. "Can a man change his spots if he wants? But I never see a Nolan look that sober. You're sober, ain't you, Nolan?" Tom had bottled himself in court. Suddenly he discovered that his nerves were raw. His mouth was thin, and his eyes bitter. "Shut your face or I'll shut it for you." He walked to the window and stood there staring out across the blinding plains to the far horizon. "See," said the squat jailbird, "he's a Nolan. Sure, I reckon he is, Greaser, but a gent can never be sure." "Hey, Nolan," said Greaser blithely. "How did the trial—" "Shut up," snapped the dry gentleman. "You trying to commit suicide? You didn't see what I saw once." "Huh," grinned Greaser. "I guess there's a lot of things you saw that nobody never saw, socked Oliger. Well, I seen this one all right. with my own peepers so I know it's so, and you can ask Tom Nolan if it ain't. Greaser sat up and looked at Tom's back and then grinned back at Sockdolager Bill. I dare you to spill it with him listening. Sockdolager looked cautiously at Tom's back and sat up himself. He took a big bite off a plug, stowed it in his jaw, took a deep breath, and looked earnestly at Greaser. Well, when the old nickel squeezer run me out of Texas, I was up here for a spell. There was a couple jobs to be done, and they offered me $20 a day. How much? Said Greaser. $5, said Sockdolager. $5 if I got to be accurate about my personal affairs. Anyway, I come drifting in here one Saturday, and I seen a sight I ain't never gonna forget. A kid was sitting his horse out in front of the church, and he had a 6-gun in each hand. He'd slice down with one and boom, and then he'd slice down with the other and bango, and then he'd snap a shot with the right gun. Well, what was he shooting at? Asked Greaser. Why, the church bells, of course, and he was playing Home Sweet Home on 'em just as pretty as anything I ever heard in my life. Never no sour note at all. Greaser looked doubtful but interested. He saw that Tom Nolan was turning a little and listening. And then, said Greaser gleefully. Then, stated Sockdolager, he stops to reload for the second chorus. That's the chance the town marshal and 2 deputies been waiting for. Well, sir, this young feller seen he couldn't get loaded in time, so he slaps his gun into his holsters and grabs his rope. The marshal, he seen what was coming, and so he stops to draw, but he never gets clear of leather. Because swoosh, this rope goes round him, and the deputy's slick as anything. The kid yips, and away he goes around the square, towing an assortment of stars and legs and dust, and when he comes up in front of the marshal's office, he slips his rope and just sits there. He don't run away, he just sits there without even loading his guns. Pretty soon the marshal gets himself untangled and jumps up with murder in his eye. Well, says the kid, do I have to take you gents for another ride or other drinks on you? And the marshal, he looks pretty silly and shuffles around, and then he says it's all right with him. And the kid gets down, and they all goes into the oasis for a shot of red-eye. Well, said Greaser expectantly, when was this and who was it? Sockdolager shifted his chew and held up his mustache while he bracketed a cockroach in the wall. That was 10 years ago, said Sockdolager, and the kid was named Tom Nolan. Tom hadn't turned all the way around. Greaser shook his head. Nope, I've been here for 5 years. That wasn't Tom Nolan. That must have been the bobolink. No, sir, said Sockdolager. That was not the bobolink. That was Tom Nolan himself. Now you dared me to tell it. You can ask him if it ain't so. Greaser was spared the trouble. Tom faced them and walked the length of the cell to the door, where he stood for a moment looking down the corridor. He came back and stood looking at Sockdolager. Yes, that's so. What of it? Sockdolager looked uncomfortable. Well, nothing of it. But when me and Greaser got picked up this morning and slammed in here, we heard about the trial, and Greaser says he don't believe it on account of he's been around here for 5 years, and says you wouldn't murder nobody. And I says that when I was here 10 years ago, you was kind of frisky. Tom went back to the cell door and stared along the corridor, his hands working aimlessly at a sack of bull. He seemed to have forgotten Sockdolager and Greaser. I tell you, said Greaser, even if he says it's so, I still don't believe you. I've been riding the grub line in these parts, and I've heard all there is to hear about the Nolans. It's just a frame, I tell you, just one of the old dollar crusher stunts. He wants everything in sight just like he did in Texas, and he had to get the Nolans to get what they had. The bobolink was the wild one. They was both wild, stated Sockdolager Bill. I tell you, I seen it with my own eyes, and that ain't all. I could tell you 100,000 stories about Nolans, and a gent that's a Nolan is a Nolan, and that's all there is to it. I seen his old man ride into town at the head of his boys with all guns going and not a window unbroken by 10 o'clock, and Tom was right there. Sure, I agrees that the grubby-fisted old coyote probably pulled this stunt on him, but you can't tell me that Nolans don't act that way. I knows different. Tom faced around. Who are you talking about? Sockdolliger blinked self-consciously. Why, you. I mean, who else? Graham, said Greaser promptly. And what do you know about Mr. Graham? Said Tom. Know about him? Said Sockdolliger. Why, man alive, it'd be easier to say what we don't know about him. 50 years ago, Greaser and me was in his right-hand men. We was in his outfit down in Bowling, Texas, and we was fools enough to think he could use us, so we just drifted in from Laramie, and damned if we didn't get locked up. Why did he lock you up here? Oh, I was willing to bury the hatchet, said Sockdolliger, and so was Greaser, even if Graham did fire him last year. But the old backstabber's getting gall-blammed particular. There was a time he'd have been mighty glad to see us, let me tell you. When Blackjack Krantz and Holdout Racker and Bully Corrigan and Gunner Finch and Bill Patson and... Tom was suddenly eager. You mean those men were with Graham in Texas? With him, said Sockdolliger. Hell, man, they was Graham. When a job had to be done, he'd send for us, and we'd lair about and do in a gent or two as per orders. He wouldn't have got to where he got without Sockdolliger, Bill Dayton, and old Greaser O'Malley. Why, one time he says to me, You mentioned Krantz and Racker and Corrigan, said Tom. Well, sure. Racker and Corrigan used to serve the papers, and Krantz and us would ride along in case anybody objected. In which case we'd uphold the law with Winchesters. Why, one time... Racker, Corrigan, Krantz, repeated Tom. He had lost interest in Sockdolliger and walked nervously back to the cell door to watch the corridor. Greaser did not miss Tom's sudden animation. He looked at Sockdolliger Bill, and the other looked back with an I-told-you-so grin. The next chapter. Guilty. It was almost sunset when Mary Graham reached the outskirts of Rio Camarca. She tugged rein and slowed her mount and inspected the streets ahead. Ginger, who followed after with stirrups loosely flapping, also slowed and pricked her ears expectantly. Mary Graham looked carefully around and saw that the back of the sheriff's office was at hand. In another 20 minutes it would be dark, and the chance she had to take would be lessened. She neck-reined her mount into the cover of the Dove building, and then slid from her saddle so that she could tie Ginger to a protruding post. The mare looked at her curiously. Now you be good, said Mary in a low voice. You stand there and don't say a word. She held her finger to her lips, and Ginger eyed her wonderingly. Mary again mounted. Beneath her buckskin jacket, her heart was racing until it was difficult for her to breathe. But she had to keep calm. She couldn't show this nervousness. She adjusted the chin thong of her hat and then spurred back to the main road to properly enter Rio Camarca. Several men in the streets she recognized as Graham punchers. It seemed that every day the personnel of the ranch increased. Strange men with stranger manners, all carrying heavy guns tied down on their thighs. Some of the citizens of the town were there, clustered outside the courthouse. Overhead the sky was blazing crimson, staining the walls of the town, and all was still as though everything held its breath before a storm. Her pony's hoofs were loud in the street, and a few men turned and then looked away. At other times her fragile beauty was enough to command the attention of the entire pueblo, but not now. More important things than a beautiful woman were in the air. The destiny of a country was hanging, so it seemed, upon the words soon to be uttered from the bench. And she was glad of this lack of attention. She had always hated their knowing glances, their slow appraisal from her small boots, up her buckskin skirt and jacket to the top of her flat hat. She had hoped she would not see Pedro, but he was there. Pedro was everywhere, always standing like a lump of rock before her, his unclean eyes watching her. He saw her and came down the courthouse steps just as though he had been waiting for her. He walked heavily and certainly. His wits were dull, his movements slow, and his cruelty strong, but he possessed the complete protection of Martin Graham, and he could do nothing wrong. She drew up, knowing she must meet him, and he lumbered through the dust to her stirrup. He pushed his words through his mouth like a pig's grunts. "The señorita was not to come to Rio Camarca," said Pedro. "I had to come." "The master will not like this, señorita." "The master knows about it," mimicked Mary. "It is none of a servant's business to question what I do." Pedro looked at her steadily, with his small bloodshot eyes set close together on his thick face. "I know the orders of my masters, señorita." "Then go find him and tell him I am here. Tell him to come out and say these things himself. Do that or get away from me, I don't care which." Pedro paused uncertainly. He could not enter the courtroom. "The judge," said Pedro, "is there and the jury is about to come in. You wait until the master comes." He reached for the bridle. Mary tightened her reins. Suddenly she jabbed spur and the pony lunged. Pedro scrambled and Mary, sitting very straight, checked the horse and brought it to prancing back. "The next time you try to touch me or anything about me, you will not be so fortunate," said Mary coolly. Pedro knew that it was so. She could ride, this Texas-born lady, and though the side saddle and her poise in it was a source of stupid wonder to him, he knew that she could have made the pony rear and strike him down. He moved back even farther. "I shall tell the master you are in Rio Camarca," said Pedro. "By all means," replied Mary, feeling better now that she saw the half-breed was frightened of her. "And you can tell him that I came here to buy some things I need. I am sure he will reward you." She walked the pony around the plaza. Nobody had been interested in that conversation in the street. All ears were keyed for the verdict and nothing else. The stores were still open. Not all of Rio Camarca could get inside that small courthouse. She drew up before the sign, Frank's Hardware. The door was open and Frank himself was just inside where he could watch the courthouse. She dismounted and, swinging her quirt, walked casually up the steps. The proprietor was astounded to see her at such a moment, and he backed up into his store as she advanced. "Yes," said Frank. "What, is there anything I can do for you, Miss Graham?" He almost fell over a nail keg as he slid around behind his counter. He craned his scrawny neck to glimpse the front of the courthouse again. "Ain't no verdict yet?" "I don't know," said Mary. He took that for lack of interest. In common with the rest of the country, he had heard the rumor that Tom Nolan had more than once looked at Mary Graham. "That's too bad about Tom Nolan," ventured Frank. "What's too bad about it?" said Mary. "He killed a man, and he will have to pay the penalty." She watched Frank's face closely for his reaction. "You mean to say you ain't interested?" gaped Frank. "Why should I be interested?" countered Mary. She was certain he could hear her heart pounding beneath her buckskin jacket. Carelessly, she swung her quirt around and watched it so that he couldn't see her eyes. He jolted himself out of his wonder. "Well, you want to buy something?" "Yes," said Mary with great casualness. "As long as I was in town and saw that you were open, I thought I would get some of the things my father forgot." Certainly, Miss Graham. Now we got in a fresh shipment of ammunition. Yes, that's it. Ammunition. I want 5 boxes of bullets. You mean cartridges, ma'am? Or musket balls? And what caliber gun? She had not foreseen such difficulty. She masked her confusion by appearing very thoughtful and strolled up the counter. Displayed in a case was a walnut-handled cavalry model Colt. She pointed at it. May I see that? Frank hauled it forth and flipped the butt toward her. She caught it and almost dropped it because of the weight. The 7.5-inch barrel made it seem like a cannon. That's a 44, said Frank. Very popular gun, but if you're buying it for yourself, I got a Derringer here that I'm buying it as a present. It's Pedro's birthday. Frank looked at her closely and then shrugged. Under his breath he said, Pedro. And then aloud, of course you'll want a belt and scabbard. Yes, and 5 boxes of bullets. And a rifle. Rifle, said Frank, as he sorted out belts from a tangled heap. You want this belt, Fancy? Why, that all depends. I want it workable. That's the main thing. Frank got scabbard and belt together and then put the gun in the holster and spent some time inserting bright shells in the loops. When he finished, he dragged out a .44 Winchester. Now this gun has got it all over the last model. The new action is, it looks very pretty, said Mary. I'll take it. And some bullets. Another 5 boxes. No, make it 10 boxes. Pedro, grumbled Frank under his breath. Yes, ma'am, and maybe you want a boot for this here rifle. Yes, of course, your very best boot. Frank got it and slid the Winchester into it. And now, is there anything else? Mary's heart hammered harder. She fought for an idea. Why, let me think. There was something else. Do you mind if I look around? Perhaps I saw it and I remember. Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead. She strolled along the shelves, taking her time. Frank finally surrendered to the desire to watch the courthouse and edged toward the door. The night was coming on and the desert wind was growing cold already. Lights were being lit in the courthouse. Mary could not be sure. She made certain that Frank was no longer watching her, and then she swiftly surveyed the hardware stock. There was a certain kind of saw which would go through iron. Meat saws, cross-cut saws, coping saws. Hacksaw! That was it. Quickly she moved to the drawer which bore the name. Silently and with cunning she pulled it out. She glanced at Frank's back in the doorway, and then with great speed drew 6 blades from the box and slid them up her sleeve. That was the first time she had ever stolen anything, and even now she couldn't do it. She reached into her pocket and put forth a gold piece and laid it in the box. Frank turned around. Did you find it, ma'am? No, I guess I must have forgotten, said Mary. Frank came back to the counter. How are you going to carry these things? Why, from my saddle, I suppose. Then I'll put 'em in a sack, ma'am. A gunny sack. He did so, and when he gave it to her, she could hardly pack it. Maybe you'd better let me carry it out, ma'am. Oh, no, she cried swiftly. I mean, it isn't heavy. I wouldn't hear of it. You want to pay me now? Half the task was done, and suddenly she felt gay. Could you charge it to Martin Graham? Oh, yes, ma'am. Charge it to Martin Graham. Certainly, ma'am. It was dark at last, and she stepped out to the porch to look swiftly through the gloom. But she did not go to her horse. She stepped down and passed between the hardware store and the Oasis Saloon. By the time she got to Ginger, her arms felt like they were broken, and it was only with great effort that she succeeded in lifting the sack up to balance another sack, crammed with food, which already hung from the other side. Ginger looked at her inquiringly. You be quiet now, said Mary. You've got a long wait, but you keep very still. Not a sound. Running silently, she hurried through the chilly blackness until she got to the hardware store again. She stepped up on the porch, walked across it and down the steps. As she approached her pony, Pedro loomed up like a black mountain. "You'll get what you wanted, señorita?" She stilled with the terror within her. "Yes, thank you, Pedro." She could feel that he was suspicious of her, that he wanted to snatch at her arm, but she bravely marched past him and took her pony's reins. She led off towards the courthouse, and Pedro lumbered behind her. When she got to the steps, she turned and handed him her reins, and he could not refuse them as she dropped them over his arm. The way was cleared when men recognized her. She walked into the hall. A Graham puncher said, "Jury just came in, Miss Graham." She thanked him, and men parted to let her as far as the courtroom entrance. There the crowd was thicker, and she could get no farther. An empty chair was at hand, and she climbed up on it. There was Racker. She had heard that he was here, and his beard was a little whiter and the pomp of him more practiced, but he had not changed. When she was 10, he had often come to their home, and one night she had heard guns and had seen a federal marshal fall dead in the path. Racker had been standing on the porch with a Colt in his hand. He had said, "Get back in bed, and if you say anything about this, I'll fry you alive." And here sat Racker, hand on his beard, looking at the jury foreman who had just stood up. She had seen that foreman before also, in Texas. And there was Bully Corrigan. Through her mind flashed a lamp-lit scene when they had brought Bully Corrigan in on a stretcher with 3 bullets in him. Blackjack Krantz and Bill Patson had gone out, and an hour later they had come back looking grim and satisfied. Bully Corrigan and Holdout Racker. And there was Tom. He was sitting sidewise to her, and he was so still. Racker stroked his beard. "You have brought in a verdict, foreman?" "Yes, Your Honor. We found him guilty, just like..." "You found him guilty of murder in the 1st degree?" asked Racker, but it was not a question. Yep," said the foreman of the jury. There was a stir and mutter in the crowd, and men started to rise. But something else was in that room. Martin Graham's beady eyes swept them all, and Martin Graham's men were there with guns thonged down, hopefully watching for the first move to be made. Racker pounded with his gavel, and the growl stopped. He looked at Tom and then said, "The defendant will come before the bar for sentence." Tom got up. "Tom Nolan," said Judge Racker, "you have been found guilty of the murder of Alan Graham in the 1st degree, and you are hereby sentenced to be hanged by the neck until you are dead." Tom did not move. Racker was uncomfortable and averted his glance. Hamilton got up, and his deputies ringed Tom. Without a word, Tom let them lead him away. Racker swabbed at his face with a bandana. "Court dismissed." Mary waited for no more. She slid down from the chair and raced through the crowd toward the door. Men were thick about her, and she managed to slide off the porch and around the courthouse unnoticed in the blackness. She knew the jail, and she did not pause. She pulled the 6 hacksaw blades from her sleeve and swiftly tied a note she had written around them and threw them in through the barred window. Quickly she ran back to slide into the crowd. She came out facing Pedro. An instant later, Martin Graham was behind her. He was too filled with amusement over his triumph to be harsh. He was almost forgiving. "I thought you were to stay home, Mary." "I had some things to buy, and I wanted to know about Ellen's murderer." He looked at her for a moment, very thoughtful. "Perhaps I was wrong about you, Mary." He turned to Pedro. "The boys aren't all to go back, Pedro. Tell Finch to send 10 men out to the Crazy Inn and clear it. Tell Sandy to hold the rest in town and not to let them get drunk. There may be some attempt to break Nolan out. Oh yes, tell Hamilton that nobody is to go near that jail, not even himself. I don't trust him, Pedro." "Yes, master. And if somebody is seen around the jail, shoot." We'll lay it on Hamilton." "Yes, master." Martin Graham took Mary's arm and found her trembling. "Why, what's the matter, my dear?" It's cold, and I forgot a coat." Martin Graham glanced at her quickly and then, saying no more, gave her a hand to her saddle.